Tackling child labour. Millions of children around the world are still made to work despite existing laws. As the world holds a day against child labour, what is being done to stop it? And what are its root causes? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Mike Hanna. 168 million. That's the number of child labourers estimated by the International Labour Organization to be working around the world. More than half of them in hazardous jobs such as mining and construction. June the 12th is the 14th World Day Against Child Labour. The latest ILO report describes the issue as a vicious cycle. It starts with a lack of education, which leads many youngsters into low-skilled and often dangerous jobs. Working in hazardous places often leads to health problems. Parents are forced to rely on their children to provide for the family. So the ILO is calling on world leaders to tackle the issue at its roots by providing free and mandatory education. However, dependence on child labour is so deeply entrenched in some developing countries that it's going to be difficult to implement the recommendations. Rob McBride has more from Phnom Penh.
The arrival of the cassava truck at this field in northwest Cambodia marks the start of the working day. And no one is too young to work. With children only able to earn $1 for a day wielding a chopper, the smallest of fingers are needed for families to make enough to live on.
These are family groups working together.
We have come here with World Vision, one of the organizations helping Cambodia realize its goal of putting children like these into school full-time. It's also Simon Senglim's dream. I prefer being in school, he tells us, but we need the money. Across Cambodia, child labor is still a problem. It is most blatant in the countryside.
I don't have money for go to school.
Recent efforts to clamp down in the cities have largely moved the problem from view, but in the brick factories outside Phnom Penh, you just have to look a little harder. In this slum area, around half the children work. As the eldest of 5 children, Sun Sre Hing is often the main income earner when her mother isn't working.
It's very difficult. Sometimes I find work on construction sites.
A local non-governmental organization wants to bring her to the protection of its center for full-time education.
All of them, they come from slum area.
But it is a hard job to convince the parents.
Poor people want to get money immediate to survive their family, so that difficult to help them. So that some people, they say that, oh, education is not get the money.
In its commitment to eradicating the most hazardous forms of child labour, Cambodia has taken a lead in Asia Pacific, the region of the world that's worst affected by the problem. But being one of the poorest countries in it means it's also one of the least well equipped to achieve its ambitious targets. The goal is to end the most hazardous forms of child labour by 2016. Despite the challenges, giving all children access to full-time education is seen as the solution to break the cycle of poverty-driven child labour.
Actually, it became a national prize. Although there is international commitment, but we take our own effort. Whether or not we can achieve 2016 or not, but it is our priority that we have to reach our commitment to the international organization.
For those children carrying the burden of work, maybe this will be the year their lives change. Rob McBride, Al Jazeera, Phnom Penh.
Well, in Cambodia, almost 40% of children leave school before the age of 15, with most of them going to work in hazardous conditions. Let's take a look at some child labour statistics from elsewhere in the world. The ILO says about 85 million children around the world work in conditions that harm their safety, health or moral development. The incidence of hazardous work among 15 to 17-year-olds is highest in Nicaragua at 34%, and the number is greatest in India, with 2.4 million children working in dangerous conditions. In sub-Saharan Africa, 21% of the children are child labourers. 15% of children work in the Arab states, but that number may be higher because it doesn't include informal employment. And there are almost 78 million child labourers in the Asia-Pacific region alone. That's more than the population of Turkey. Well, let's now bring in our guests. In Geneva, Asfar Khan, one of the authors of the International Labour Organization World Report on Child Labour, and in New Delhi, Dhananjay Tingle, Executive Director of Save the Childhood Movement, India's largest movement for the protection of children. Welcome to you both. If I begin with you, Asfar Khan, let's start off by recognizing that this is a global problem created by a myriad of reasons other than region.
Yes, exactly. I mean, the whole world of work is changing. I mean, we've been seeing what has been happening to the world since the introduction of the policies which go under the Washington Consensus, the name of the Washington Consensus. And what they have done is they have introduced a lot of economic insecurity into the lives of the people. And child labor is a dependent variable. Many a times the decisions that are being made are made by the parents of these children to allocate the labor of these children to different end users, and very often these decisions are motivated by conditions of poverty and of I should put it, of vulnerability, of social vulnerability that they encounter. And the point is that decent work jobs have been declining the world over, and this is a kind of a phenomena that people have to deal with in their everyday lives. How do you make ends meet? These children now make an enormous contribution to the household income, and if you were to take them out of work, then these households would suffer what Amartya Sen calls entitlement failure.
Well, Dhananjay Tingle, I mean, your view on that, the difficulty that you are dealing with in terms of recognizing that there is an economic imperative for many of these children to work.
Yeah, this is in fact a myth which I will say that the income which the children earn that contributes in the livelihood of the families. BBA, since last 40 years, 35 years, have rescued more than 84,000 children, and we have come across all the places wherever when we have talked to the children, we didn't find any child getting more than 15 rupees a day, which is just about not even 25 cents which they get. So most of them, and we have done a study called Capital Corruption on the Economics of Child Labor, and we found that by employing children, the only person who benefits are the employers. And the employers are charging the corporates with the minimum wages which are applicable in India, and they're paying just less than even 1/10 of the wage to a child, whereas a child needs to work for more than 14 to 16 hours a day. So it's not that that the children, because they earn, that's why they have to be there. It would have been better if the parents would have got the jobs and instead of children. So this is a complete sure exploitation. The study which we did, we found that by employing children, there's 1,200 billion rupees are being generated as a black money in the Indian industries.
Well, let me go to Asfar Khan. Apologies for interrupting, Dhananjay, but I want to go to Asfar Khan on that particular point that you made up there. The only people who benefit from child labour are the employers. That's a pretty damning statement, is it not, Asfar Khan?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it's all a question of sort of cutting back on costs. But you must also understand that, I mean, in our estimates, we found that 70% of child labor is in unpaid family work. And these children can also be employed by their own parents, I mean, who could be their employers in global value chains. And there is a certain responsibility that the parents also have to have on behalf of the children. But true enough, I mean, sure, I mean, it's a question of cost. It's a question of how you can cut back on costs, and children come the cheapest.
Well, let me just follow up a question to you, Asfar Khan. The way in which this becomes a vicious type of a cycle. Now, your reports indicate that those who've worked as child laborers have poorer job prospects when they enter adulthood. Statistics being quoted in Guinea, 73% of child laborers are in unpaid family work, as you said, by the age of 16 to 24. That is compared to a figure of 29% among those who did not work as children. There's a clear correlation of a declining sense of value in the job market if you work as a child laborer, is it not?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it is more or less associated with lower educational attainment and also with jobs where decent work standards are not there. In other words, I mean, early school leavers run the greater risk of being out of the job market completely. They have a tougher time finding first jobs and stable jobs. And even when they find a kind of a stable jobs, well, they're less likely to find stable jobs than their more educated counterparts.
Well, Dhananjay Tingle, taking a look at the example of India, the millions of child laborers employed there, it would appear, though, that the majority of them are actually employed in the agricultural sector. Would that be correct?
Yeah, agricultural sector is the largest employer of the children in India. That's the largest, that's absolutely correct. And I just will add to it that the children, because of the lack of education and the exploitation they face, they're not the trained skilled workers who can get the higher wages. So the wages which they're getting, they remains very low. And it's a triangulation kind of a thing, that what is the contributing factor for the children to work, whether it's illiteracy, labor, or the poverty. It's all three combined together when it comes down to it. It's a kind of a three-way process. Because the child is illiterate, they are not able to get enough money, their incomes are low. So it's a kind of a thing which keeps on going from generation to generation.
But there's also a direct correlation, if I may stay with you, Dhananjay, between the state of the economy and the level of child labour, does it not? Take once again India for an example. In the high-tech economic development in the 90s, there was an increased demand for skilled workers. Now, that appeared to result, it seems, in higher school enrollment and indeed reduced child labour. So the creation of jobs for skilled workers is a contributory factor to reducing child labour, is it not?
That's true. That's what we always say, that if you give work to the adults, that will surely reduce the children from child labour. That's what we have been saying, that just because if the economic the criteria of minimizing the cost is not is the reason, or to have the children working with them, if they can give the work, the ideal situation is what you are talking, that the adults should get the job and the children should be in the school.
Well,
that will surely increase the increase the education level, and that will also increase the prospect of the children getting a better job once they come out of the schools.
Well, we're clearly isolating a very important contributory factor, Asfar Khan, and that is the issue of education. A UNESCO report states, for example, that if all students in lower income countries left school with basic reading skills, some 171 million could be lifted out of poverty. That's a 12% cut in global poverty. So it's not just with respect to child labour, but education clearly absolutely critical in terms of improving the lives of everybody and in terms as well of reducing the level of child labour.
I have no arguments with that, Mike. I mean, I totally agree with that. I mean, after all, education is a fundamental right, I mean, for everybody. And if you do provide education, I mean, you would enable the children to sort of exercise their capabilities to be more productively involved in the latter life. And I think it does play a major role. I mean, whether it is in terms of eliminating child labor or whether it is in terms of lifting people out of poverty. It is important. But let me make one thing very clear. Look, when we make all policies and efforts that are directed towards improving children's education or removing people out of poverty, I mean, they need a kind of a supporting and an enabling environment. Without this, you can't achieve it. Above all, what you require is what is, I would say, a political will, and which is consonant with the government efforts to sort of improve social sector provisioning, particularly in health and education, to improve social protection, to improve or to follow up with redistributive policies which tackle inequality, and to create a decent work opportunities for the adults. All of these have to go hand in hand. You can't argue that that just by providing education everything would become would be fine simply when the governments are actually cutting back on education funding. You can't argue for the well-being of the children when the governments are cutting back on health sector spending. You can't argue for the creation of employment for the adults when you follow austerity measures. I mean, we have to think about all these things as a whole.
Well, Dhananjay Tingle, we heard the phrase there, if there's a political will, and there needs to be a political will to improve the situation. Is there a political will to reduce the level of child labour in India?
The efforts are being made. There have been many pro-children legislations, but surely there is not that much of a will as is required. We have been demanding from the government to immediately bring the child labour amendments in the child labour law, though it has been approved by cabinet thrice. We have been demanding that, but there is not that much of a will as on the other issues as it requires to be on children issues. It's not only on child labour, it's on all the child rights issues. Even in India, since 2010, the education has become a fundamental right, but still there are a large number of children who are still out of school. So it surely requires a more political will for the children issues too, if we have to talk of eradication of the child labour, and to bring, and not only for political will, but it has to be a will of the administrations and the people who are implementing the laws also. But we have seen that the conviction or the proper implementation of the law, if that can be done properly, that also is a very big deterrent factor in the checking or decreasing the child labour.
Well, we're talking about regional, national efforts, but Asfar Khan as well, that there has to be an international aspect to this. There is in place the Forced Labour Convention. There is in place a protocol to the Forced Labour Convention, which is attempting to give teeth and to persuade and engage governments in terms of preventing forced labour, not just child labour, but right across the board. Do you think these teeth are sufficient? Is there enough international muscle to be able to bring pressure to bear on governments?
Well, I mean, certainly as far as the issues are concerned, everybody sort of admits to the fact that, these are concerns that need to be dealt with. After all, when the protocol went for a vote, I mean, most of the countries, over 2/3 of the ILO member states actually voted for the protocol. The fact that it has not been ratified by many as yet is still because people are looking into their own implementing mechanism, and what kind of problems they have at the moment, and at what level would they be able to, at what I would say opportunities they would have to sort of be able to ratify the convention. Yes, the protocol has teeth, and I think there is a consensus on the part of the international governments to eradicate forced labor. But it's not that it would be achieved overnight. I mean, it's a long journey ahead.
Dhananjay Tingle, to what extent in India is there recognition that dealing with the issue of child labour is not necessarily a national one alone, that there needs to be an internationalist approach to it, there needs to be an involvement of all governments and of international organisations throughout the world? Is there a perception of this?
No, there's no such perception as such. India it's an issue which is a national issue, and the government has to deal with it at the national level. Though the international conventions which has come, they surely help us, help the government in bringing the laws also. So it's still, but India has not signed the Convention 182 on the worst forms of child labor. And so it's also the international conventions, though even if they are voted, but it needs to be ratified by the national governments. So Indian government considers to be a national issue, and once the amendments in the law, child labor law, are brought in, then that's what it needs to be done.
Well, on this...
And in fact, I feel that all the...
Continue.
Yeah, Mike. In fact, it is also important that internationally also, if all the national governments start following it up of their own, the way they can look at controlling the child labor or checking or prohibiting the child labor, then the menace can be checked also.
Well, as Asfar Khan, it is important, I believe, to recognize on this day, recognizing child labor, that the rate of child labor is 1/3 lower now than it was in 2000. Is this because the situation is improving, or other factors are involved?
I think the situation in some countries has improved. I mean, although we have come up with this, the global estimate, which shows that child labor declined by 1/3, we cannot say for certain whether this is across the board or is it concentrated in certain countries, as I mentioned, as like China and in India, which have put in a lot of effort in tackling child labor issues and fighting child labor. So we're doing some kind of a trends analysis now to be able to come up with some explanation behind these global trends. And these areas of inquiries have a critical importance for future policy efforts to progressively eliminating child labor, and also in implementing the post-2015 development agenda.
Well, I mean, it would appear key, Asfar Khan, in that it may indicate what has been done right to reduce the levels of child labor, does it not?
That's right. I mean, you know, although the global estimates don't actually focus on the policies and program that have been most effective. What we do know is that there have been many schemes the world over which have yielded very positive results, and I could refer to the Bolsa Familia in Brazil, the Oportunidades in Mexico, the midday meal scheme in India, the food guarantee scheme in Kerala, the reform of the social pension, particularly the one targeting old age pension in South Africa, and the basic income scheme as a citizenship right, which has been implemented, although in controlled environments in many parts of the world. All of these have achieved a great success. And the thing is, now we have to see what aspects of these can be replicated more widely. But certainly from the global estimates, we cannot say exactly, what kind of policies and program have brought about this success.
Dhananjay Tingle, very quickly, do you think that your job, your attempts to protect the children of India is getting easier? Is it a little less hard than it has been in the past?
I will not say so. The fight is still on, and so surely the government laws and the things which are coming in, if they come in the right time, and then it may become slightly easy, but it is important to see the laws which are formulated, they need to be implemented properly. The fight is not for bringing the law, but to get the law implemented properly on the ground.
Well, at this point, on this Child Labour Day, my thanks to our guests, Asfar Khan and Dhananjay Tingle. And thank you for watching. As always, we would like to hear your thoughts. You can contact us on our program page at aljazeera.com. You can also post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Mike Hanna, and the whole team here, thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.